Gentlemen, and welcome to our third lesson about the Constitutional Convention. Today we are going to be learning about how Article 2 of the Constitution was written. Remember that articles of the Constitution are kind of like chapters. Article 1 had to do with the legislative branch of government, so Article 2 has to do with the executive branch of government. Our essential question for today: what was Article 2, the executive branch, agreed to by the delegates to the Constitutional Convention? Or how? Go ahead and write that across the top of your Cornell notes. In the background is the Oval Office, the President's working space, as decorated by Joe Biden. As always, when I do these lessons, I review vocabulary that will be used during the lesson, and today is no different. Our first vocabulary word is executive. We are learning about the executive branch of government, otherwise known as the President of the United States. The executive branch of government is the branch of government responsible for enforcing and carrying out the laws. The legislative branch gets to write the laws. The executive branch has the authority to enforce or carry out the laws, to execute the laws. It's another use of the word execute. And a presidential veto. The president has the power of the veto, which you will find out today. A veto is a presidential rejection of a law passed or an action taken by Congress. So the House and Senate can pass a law, but if the president vetoes it, it's not a law. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a little bit. So our first left side question is, how was the US presidency created? Just a little reminder, under the Articles of Confederation, there was no person in charge. Everything was a group decision. So the decision to create a president of the United States was a big deal. And we're going to get into that into a little bit more detail here. In the end, after all the debates and the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan and the one executive and three executives, they finally decided to create a single executive with a president in charge. And they came up with that term, president. Only one person. So they came up with the title, and they decided to give that power to one person and not a group of three. The president would be elected to a 4-year term and could run for re-election. The reason there's an asterisk there is in the beginning, a president had the ability, if they chose to run for re-election as many times as they wanted. In practice, presidents kind of followed the unofficial 2-term limit. No president ran for a 3rd term until Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1940, and that's because we were in the middle of World War II. But after Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, the Republicans in Congress decided to put a 2-term limit into the Constitution so that no president could serve more than 2 terms again. They did decide to create a vice president who would be elected, who would become president if the president died, resigned, or was removed from office. So the vice president is elected along with the president, but does not have nearly as much power. And the entire purpose of the vice president is basically to have someone who would take over the presidency if the president is no longer president due to death, resignation, or removal through the process of impeachment, which has been in the news the last few years. And the president has the ability to oversee all of the federal departments and appoint their leaders. So all the different agencies of government, the president gets to decide who runs those agencies. He chooses who runs those agencies. He does need to get the Senate to approve his nominations for those agencies, but the president has the power to choose who he nominates to lead the various federal departments. So, for example, the Department of Defense being in charge of the military, the Department of the Treasury being responsible for the nation's money, the Department of Justice being responsible for law enforcement throughout the country, Department of Education. I mean, I could go down the list, but he gets to choose all those people. He also gets to choose members of the federal judiciary. The president chooses who sits as judges on federal courts, including the Supreme Court. And that is an incredibly powerful authority the president has. This is not all of the president's powers, it's just some of them. And remember, they had a debate over how long the president should serve. Some people thought it should be a 7-year term. Some people thought it should be basically once you're president for life. That would have been more like a king. They decided every 4 years the president has to come back and ask for his job again, or her eventually. So what powers does the executive branch have? What powers? You'll notice both of those pictures are the Oval Office. Joe Biden is going with the dark blue rug, whereas Barack Obama was sitting in George W. Bush's Oval Office the day after he got elected president in 2008. President gets to choose how to decorate the office. Interestingly enough, Joe Biden has decided to go back and use Bill Clinton's old Oval Office carpet for whatever that's worth to you. One of the powers the president has, and pretty darn important, he's commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. The only person who can give orders to the U.S. military is the President of the United States. Everyone else can have an opinion, but only the president can issue orders to the military through the Secretary of Defense. The president appoints all federal judges and cabinet agency leaders. I kind of talked about that on the previous slide. Who the president chooses to be judges is a very, very, very big deal. And who the president chooses to run the different cabinet agencies is also a big deal. When Democrats are in power, they tend to choose leaders of the Environmental Protection Agency that want to protect the environment. And when Republicans are in power, they tend to choose leaders of the Environmental Protection Agency who want to make it easier for business to use public lands to make money. That's just a fact in recent years, going all the way back to Ronald Reagan. The president can sign or veto all bills passed by Congress. So if the House and Senate both pass a bill, it goes to the president's desk, and if the president signs it, that bill becomes a law. It's a rather famous Schoolhouse Rock video about that whole process. If the president vetoes it, the Congress can override that veto, but they have to do so by a supermajority, by voting by a 2/3 margin in both the House and the Senate. It takes 2/3 to override a presidential veto. That's very, very hard to do. The president has the power to pardon anyone for any federal crime whatsoever. This power is usually not controversial, but during the Trump administration, President Trump pardoned a lot of people that were considered shady, shall we say. And Bill Clinton, when he left office, issued some pardons that were also considered shady. So just to be apolitical, we've had Democrat and Republican presidents who've had some questionable pardons. But normally, this is an uncontroversial power if the president uses it judiciously. The president is the only person who can negotiate with foreign governments. So members of Congress can have an opinion as to what we do and how we treat other countries, but only the president gets to decide. There's also a member of the cabinet called the Secretary of State, who basically serves as the foreign minister of the United States and acts on behalf of the president. The vice president, as I said on the previous slide, becomes president if the president dies, resigns, or is removed from office. We've only had one president resign. That was Richard Nixon. We've had a few presidents die in office. The most recent was John F. Kennedy. And of course, we've now had 4 impeachment trials in the history of the United States. And in none of those trials, including the 2 of former President Trump, has the president actually been removed from office. So it's a very difficult hill to climb. Anything that has an asterisk basically means the president needs the Senate's agreement or consent. The president gets to choose who leads the agencies. The president gets to choose who sits on the Supreme Court. But he also needs to say to the Senate, hey, can you please approve my choice? And if they don't approve his choice, or her eventually, then he has to choose somebody else. So it's not an unlimited power. The Senate actually has a check on that power. All right, here we go. This is one of the more controversial things in the Constitution, but it is what it is. So we're going to talk about that right now. How would the president be elected? Americans are very confused about this, and I think in the last few elections, we've come to know this process a little bit more than maybe in the past, because things have gotten a little bit chippier and more salty than they've been in the past. So let's talk about how the president is actually elected. The framers of the Constitution, the guys who showed up in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention representing 12 out of 13 states, they were afraid of the president being elected directly by the people. We like to think of the United States as the world's first democracy, and we are, but in the beginning, that democracy was very filtered and very controlled. They did not just want to have a system whereby whoever got the most votes automatically won the presidency. So they created something different. They were afraid of the uneducated and uninformed masses, otherwise the mob, electing fools as a leader. They wanted to have some kind of process whereby the people had input, but that there was some kind of filter in between just in case the people made a not so great decision. Theoretically, that's why this system was created. In practice, it's never worked the way it was intended. They created something called the Electoral College. So the president is not elected directly by whoever gets the most votes. The president is elected by a system called the Electoral College. And here's a newsflash for you kids. It has nothing to do with going to college. It's a group of people who have the responsibility to get together and vote for the President of the United States. Each state gets a number of electors based on its total members of Congress. So, in the last lesson, I told you how the House of Representatives is based on the population of the state, how each state gets 2 senators. Well, if you add up the number of members of the House of Representatives and the Senate that each state has, that's how many electoral votes it has. So that number changes every decade after the census. There are currently 50 states with 535 electors, and Washington, D.C. is given 3 electors. 535, there are 435 members of the House of Representatives and 100 senators. So there are 535 total electoral votes. What you see on the left are the last 2 presidential elections. The bottom one is when Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton. He got 306 electoral votes and Hillary Clinton got 232. At the top is the map where Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump. And ironically, for the first time in American history, the electoral vote total was exactly the same. Joe Biden got 306 electoral votes, and Donald Trump got 232 electoral votes. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, but the red states are Republican, the blue states are Democrat. Basically, in the 2020 election, 5 states switched from 2016. The electors are actual human beings who have a right to vote directly for the president. So when you are voting for president, you're not actually voting for the president. You're actually voting for a group of people who are promising to vote for your presidential candidate. And it's a winner-take-all system. Whoever wins a state gets all of the electors from that state. So currently, Oregon has 7 electors. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won Oregon, and so they got all 7 electors from Oregon. So there were 7 people from Oregon who promised that they would vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and they did exactly that. In practice, all of the electors from a state vote for the candidate the people that state voted for. So the framers intended for them to exercise independent judgment and to vote for someone else if they thought it was a bad choice. But the way this system actually works is the electors from a state vote the way that state votes. And so the system doesn't actually work the way it was intended. But the system does have certain deficiencies that I'm going to point out as soon as I'm done with this explanation here. Whoever gets the most electoral votes for president wins. So right now, the minimum number of electoral votes it takes to be elected president is 270 and out of 538. So 270 is 50% plus 1. So whoever gets 270 or more electoral votes is elected president of the United States. So I'm going to have you hold on to your horses, folks, because I'm about to give you a detailed explanation of that. Alrighty, folks, let's go ahead and jump right into it and discuss how the Electoral College works. And we're going to begin that discussion with the 2020 presidential election, which is a controversial election because for the first time in the history of our country, the person who lost that election, President Trump, refused to acknowledge his loss. And he did lose, and it wasn't honestly even that close by historical standards. He was pretty soundly defeated by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So let's just look at the raw vote total. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris got 81,286,358 votes across the country, which doesn't matter, but that came out to be 51.26%. It's also more votes than any presidential candidate in history has ever received. But the most important thing is that earned him 306 electoral votes, and it takes 270 electoral votes to win. So Joe Biden was elected president. Donald Trump got 74,225,839 votes, which was the second most votes ever cast for president in the history of the country. The previous record was Barack Obama in 2008 with 69 million. But that was only 46.8% of the vote, or 232 electoral votes. These are the electoral votes from each state. Now, you may remember on January 6th, there was a violent insurrection at the Capitol in which a mob basically tried to prevent the Congress from reading the electoral votes from all of the states so that Joe Biden would not be confirmed as the new president. That happened on the day that these votes were counted. So you can see how each state voted here. The states that switched in the 2020 election from the 2016 election were Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. Those are the states that made the difference. And some of them were actually close. Like look at Arizona. It was there's a difference there of 11,000 votes. But Joe Biden did get 11,000 votes more than Donald Trump. In Georgia, the difference was about 12,000 votes. Okay? So that's out of millions and millions cast. That is a narrow margin, but the way the system works, all of those electoral votes went to Joe Biden. In Pennsylvania, it really wasn't that close. There was a 90,000 vote difference. In Michigan, there was over 100,000 vote difference, so that really wasn't close. And in Wisconsin, there was a difference of about 20,000 votes. So if you got all those up, a few 100,000 votes could have shifted the election, which is actually kind of concerning if you look at the fact that across the country, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 7 million plus votes. Most of those 7 million votes, though, came from California, because look at this. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in California by 5 million votes. So 5 million of those 7 million votes came from one state. If you wanted to look at Oregon, this is how Oregon voted in the 2020 presidential election. Marion County actually voted for Joe Biden. Usually Marion County is Republican, but it did vote for Biden. And for the first time ever, Deschutes County voted for a Democrat. So all the counties in blue voted for Trump. It may look like Trump won more, but those counties in blue have very, very low populations. So let's go ahead and go back in time and look at the 2016 presidential election. This is going to show you how the Electoral College can be problematic. In 2016, Donald Trump got 62,985,153 votes for 45.93%. However, Hillary Clinton got 65,853,677 votes, about 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, 2.9 million. And that doesn't matter. Even though Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump, that is not how we elect the president. Because in the Electoral College, Donald Trump got 304. 2 of his electors did not vote for him. And Hillary Clinton got 227. 5 of her electors did not vote for her. That's why it says write-in 7. So there's 7 people who were faithless electors and did not vote the way they should. This is how the states voted, and basically the states that determined the presidency and made Donald Trump president were Pennsylvania. Donald Trump won Pennsylvania by about 44,000 votes. That was a surprise. Michigan, Donald Trump won Michigan by about 11,000 votes. And Wisconsin, Donald Trump won Wisconsin by about 23,000 votes. Back then, Georgia voted for Trump, and Arizona voted for Trump by about 4 percentage points. So that is how Trump became president, and that's what we call, there's one of 4 elections in our history where the loser of the Electoral College actually won the popular vote. The other time that happened was in the year 2000. So let's go back to the year 2000. So Donald Trump did not win the popular vote either time. He did not get more votes than the person he ran against either time. But by the way we elect the president, he was legitimately elected in 2016. Let's go back to the year 2000, before you were born. This is another time when someone who lost the popular vote won the presidency. George Bush and Richard Cheney, 50,462,412 for 47.87. Al Gore got 51,009,810. So there was a difference there of about 600,000 votes. But George W. Bush won the Electoral College by exactly 2 votes, 271 to 266. And that election came down to the state of Florida. By the way, notice how the numbers are different because that was a different census. So each state had a different number of electoral votes in that election. Florida that year was determined by 500 votes. George W. Bush, 2,912,790. Al Gore, 2,912,253. Those 500 votes determined the president because George W. Bush got all 25 of Florida's electoral votes, and he needed all 25 of Florida's electoral votes to get over the top to 270 because he only got 271 electoral votes. Not all elections are this close. There was the year 2008, which is the most decisive election in recent years, where Barack Obama beat John McCain by 7 percentage points, and he got 365 electoral votes, and John McCain only got 173. And then, of course, when I was in 8th grade, kind of a blowout, 1984, Ronald Reagan won all but one state in Washington, D.C. for a 525-13 Electoral College blowout. And then in 1964, it was the other way around. Lyndon Johnson beat Barry Goldwater, 486 electoral votes to 52. So there have been blowouts in our history, but we're in a much more polarized political time. And so I'm going to guess that in your lifetime, at least early in your lifetime, most presidential elections are going to be fairly close. So there you go. There's the Electoral College. There's how we elect the president. Feel free to ask me questions, but other than that, we'll get you going with your summary. All right, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we're going to invite you to go ahead and write that summary. And honestly, this is going to be a longer summary. You probably should be closer to 8 sentences and not just 5, because you need to talk about what powers they decided to give the president, what some checks on those powers were. So, for example, the Senate has to approve people, and the president has to run for re-election every 4 years and things like that. And the process by which we decided to elect the president. All of those things should be in your summary, so it's going to be a little bit longer, but you can do it, folks. I believe in you, and we'll go ahead and let you get to it. This is Mr. Blumendahl, once again, signing off on the Waldo Middle School Social Studies YouTube Network.